Hello. Welcome back to the Space Gulag. I'm giving away 3 lightsabers because we just hit 50,000 subscribers! Let's do it. I'm so hyped right now. We hit it maybe 30 minutes ago, and I want to give away these lightsabers. Finally get to give these lightsabers away before I move. So let's go straight into it, and right after that, I have a new announcement. Boom. Congratulations. I'm not going to even try and say that. Congratulations. I will send you an email, and we could discuss the lightsaber. The next lightsaber goes to... Congratulations, Jeremy. You won a free lightsaber. I will be sending you an email very shortly. And the last lightsaber goes to... Congratulations, Brandon. You just won yourself a free lightsaber. So I will be sending all of you emails right after I'm done recording this. And the next announcement is I'm releasing merch! I have a link right down below if you want to go get yourself some PPSW merch. I'm releasing it in the classic blue, red, and yellow. I also have custom art that I did myself just for you guys, so go check out the merch. Thank you all for 50,000 subscribers. Welcome back to the Space Gulag. We're going to find out what would have happened had Luke and Leia been raised by Grandmaster Yoda. Before we begin, special thanks to our patrons, voice actors, everyone else part of my team. We don't have a giveaway listed right now, but there will be a new one announced in due time, I assure you. And there is a limited time shirt available on the merch store. It is the Pride of the Empire shirt. It is limited time for Season 1, wait what? For the Earth series. So if you want to get that, it is down below. Otherwise, our story begins a moment after Padme's death. The sole hope of the galaxy felt like it had been taken away. While yes, the Jedi were gone from the galaxy, and yes, the Republic fell, something felt lost with Padme's death. When she died, it felt like the light in the galaxy died with her. It was something rather poetic, but tragic at the same time. 2 babies crying, 2 Jedi Masters, and a senator from Alderaan. What to do? Master Yoda was the first Grand Master in nearly 3,000 years to watch his order fall out from under him. Master Yoda felt the pain of the order falling in his heart. How could he live with himself on his own actions? He allowed Anakin to fall into darkness, but not take closer care of him. Sure, the blame could be passed around, but he was the Grand Master. It was his responsibility, like it or not. Though he couldn't focus on his mistakes. They had come and gone. By the time Yoda realized that the Jedi needed to change, it was too late. But it wasn't too late for him to change. Yoda looked over at Kenobi, who asked him what they were going to do now. Yoda told Obi-Wan that failure was the greatest teacher. Obi-Wan had a puzzled look on his face, but Yoda told him that he was going to take the children to Dagobah. They would be hidden from the Emperor there. He would train the children in the ways of the Force, so that when they were ready, they could do what they needed to do and bring balance to the Force where their father could not. Yoda told Obi-Wan that he may do as he wished, but he did have training for him from his old master. Obi-Wan was a little confused, but when Yoda informed him that it was Qui-Gon Jinn, he understood. Well, kinda. Yoda informed him that Qui-Gon returned from the netherworld of the Force. He was able to actively communicate through the Force to the living. Obi-Wan nodded his head and pondered for a moment. Within an hour or so, the 3 would leave. While on the Tantive 4, on the way to their respective locations, they would pick up discussion from Polis Massa. Yoda would hold his ground, continuing to inform the other 2 that he was taking this mission because he believed he could do it. Bail wanted to take his daughter, believing that she would have a strong political voice, and while Obi-Wan was trying to figure out where his place in the galaxy was. He certainly couldn't go out into the galaxy without a purpose. He needed to strive for something. Yoda knew that Bail wanted the child for his own personal reasons, rather than a greater purpose, but Yoda saw that. While Bail wasn't a bad man, he knew that his wife wanted a daughter, and taking Anakin's daughter would fill that role for the 2 of them. Yoda, once they arrived over Dagobah, would take the shuttle he arrived in, with the nutrients needed for the children until he could establish a home for them and himself. He would depart from the Tantive 4, leaving Obi-Wan and Bail for their own respective missions. They had come to terms, and Bail would take Kenobi with him while he studied the Force a little bit more. And whenever Obi-Wan was ready, he could go out into the galaxy and follow the path that the Force set forth for him. When Yoda's shuttle landed, the children were both sobbing in tears because of the terrible sound the small vessel made upon entering Dagobah's atmosphere, not to mention the amount of pressure on the head when it came entering onto the planet's surface. Yoda took care of the children once the ship landed, until they were finally stopped crying. When Yoda turned around, he thought what he would do. He'd been to Dagobah before, and the last time he was here, he was warned of Order 66. He didn't believe it then, and he surely did now. Yoda looked around and found a small plot of land that could be used to build a small home. Yoda got himself together, and while the children were sleeping, he used the Force to help him construct a new home, taking apart different logs of trees with his lightsaber, building as much of a sanitary environment as he could. The biggest concern for Yoda was the possibility of either of the children having an infection of sorts. While for Yoda he'd be fine, the children were, well, children. Their immune systems hadn't fully developed. They were most vulnerable to creatures across the entire face of Dagobah, and there was no denying that. Yoda laid down a surface of wood that he would be able to take care of and actually keep clean. In the middle of the home, there was a little structure comprised of rocks and stones that would become a chimney. All laid nicely on top of each other, the stones we built with wet mud smushed in between. Yoda continued using all the elements around him until he was able to, after hours of hard work, construct the house that would be mostly complete. It sealed his ship up, because the capsule had heat and oxygen that filtered out whatever bad air Dagobah could possess. The vessel was actually placed inside of the home, because for at least a couple of months, it would suffice as a bedroom for the two children. Yoda laid it down long ways to ensure that it provided enough room, and also so that the ever-so-fragile children didn't accidentally roll over and delete themselves from existence. Life would be quiet for Yoda. He had a lot to unpack about not just himself, but the way he was going to teach. Yoda simply knew he couldn't train Luke and Leia like he'd trained thousands of students for the last 600 years. Yoda couldn't just rely on them following the code and expecting it to make sense. Even if it was simply the way that they were nurtured, the Jedi Code didn't function in the same manner as it did inside the temple as it did outside of the temple, especially not on a planet as deadly as Dagobah. The question remained as to why Yoda chose Dagobah, but the truth is, it was the only way for him to conceal the location of Luke and Leia without physically exhausting himself. Otherwise, the planet was an absolute nightmare to raise two children on. By the time the two children started crawling, they would become an immediate threat to themselves. If they wandered out too far, then a lizard could bite them and poison them, they could be gotten by one of the massive fish that could walk on land, or simply, they could be strangled by a hungry snake. The options were limitless to how they could easily end their own lives by accidentally doing so. Yoda, though, did a good job at filling the parental role he needed to fill. He took care of the children constantly and made sure they had healthy food, even it was from the ever-so-delightful delicacy that Dagobah offered. Regardless of Yoda's parenting habits, he was also rigorously working on himself, making sure that he as a teacher was more prepared than ever, if it meant he had to do a lot of self-reflection, even visiting back to in his mind's eye, the small temple on Ahch-To. The temple housed all the ancient documents of the Jedi, and yet for whatever reason Yoda felt compelled to abandon that ideology. Something Yoda knew, but didn't realize he had to still do, was learn the fact that failure was the greatest teacher. Sure, Yoda had taught that lesson several times over the past 600 years, and even more so it was something that his teacher taught him. At least he realized it was still a lesson that he needed to learn. Because it was the greatest lesson. Indeed it was. Because without failure there was no learning, and yet had Yoda's perception become any different, he would have tilted into becoming a hermit on his own and becoming a failure of the Jedi. Yoda had to make the discernible choice of what would be right or wrong. Sometimes Yoda thought about it. Sometimes it haunted him. He had two choices. He could have split the children up and gone into hiding, and allowed Obi-Wan to have the Lars family raise Luke and leave Leia to the Organas, or he could have done what he was doing now. Though there was something that made Yoda struggle more than anything. It was his relationship with young Skywalker, and how it descended in the chaos so fast. The thoughts that stayed on Yoda's mind were hard to distinguish. Partially regret, and part of it was destiny. All at the same time he felt melancholy over the entire situation. He could have saved Anakin, and especially because of having the two Skywalker children near him all the time, he felt Anakin's presence. The two children were simply combined would become greater than Anakin could have ever become, and it made their presence all the more difficult to deal with emotionally. Luke and Leia were something ever so rare in the Force, a dyad, and their power was so immaculate together that it matched the raw strength that only the Chosen One himself could achieve. Yoda dwelled a lot in the past, even while he could admit that it was contributing to his failure. While one must always accept what had happened and move on, Yoda simply couldn't. Nearly 10,000 Jedi died because he couldn't step in when he needed to. He did what he could for Ahsoka, and yet at every opportunity the Council had to ensure Skywalker could be saved, and they didn't. First, Yoda went back to the beginning of the war. He believed he was doing Anakin a service by changing the documents around, assigning Ahsoka to be Anakin's student instead of Obi-Wan's. Anakin seemed to enjoy that, Sure, thinking of Obi-Wan's death wasn't a great decision, nor was the betrayal of Ahsoka, though Yoda wasn't pleased with the choice either. He represented the voice of the Council, and he was one of 4 members that didn't vote for Ahsoka to be removed from the Jedi Order. The others were Obi-Wan Kenobi, Plo Koon, and Shaak Ti. Ahsoka didn't win the majority, but rightly so. Anakin blamed the entire Council for it, and when Yoda chose not to come back, she did what any Jedi should be able to do, and that's determine what the proper path of action is in a moment of emotional struggle. On the other hand, at the end of the war, Anakin seemed more irritable. There was something that changed in young Skywalker, especially after Ahsoka left. Obi-Wan mentioned it to him during a mission he and Skywalker had on Utapau, though Yoda must confess he had a moment in which he could have changed everything around for the better. It was a singular moment when he confronted Anakin about hearing Qui-Gon's voice on Mortis. Anakin seemed a little distant from the idea, and so Yoda let him be. But Yoda could have done something. He could have challenged Skywalker to have that conversation. And yet, before Yoda departed for Kashyyyk, he talked to Anakin about death. And while Yoda gave some sound advice, it wasn't what Anakin needed in that moment. While there were 100 reasons for Anakin to feel the need to turn to the dark side, what was done, and Yoda couldn't dwell on it. If he dwelled on it, then he was simply giving himself over to failure. He needed to focus on what he could do with the children. Yoda's plan was simple, and involved him teaching the children everything he knew about the Force, and ensuring that they were indeed ready to face down the Emperor, still unaware that Vader was alive. Yoda had one issue when it came to discussing their lineage. He would have to inform them at some point about their parents, and yet Yoda had no idea of how he would do it. But that wasn't of any concern yet. They were still infants. For several months, Yoda would continue his own personal training until tragedy. When the children were finally able to crawl and walk, they became a major danger to themselves, and Luke became a danger to himself when he stumbled out of the little home and was bitten by a poisonous snake. Yoda had to make sure Luke was alright, but there wasn't anything around him that he could use as an antidote. The truth is, only the strong would survive this. Luke was still an infant, and Yoda had to rely on Bail Organa getting from halfway across the galaxy to Dagobah with the antidote to help keep Luke alive. The waiting game would feel like a century. Of course, Yoda knew what it felt like to wait a century, considering he lived several of them. Yoda would keep the children together, and he would keep a constant watch over Luke, making Dagobah swamp rat soup with a powerful amount of protein that could be used to keep him alive. Of course, this for Yoda was a stressful moment, but when Bail Organa arrived, it felt like there was a chance for survival. A small vessel dropped down to the planet, and out came Bail Organa and a group of medical professionals. They immediately got to work on Luke and put him inside the shuttle, while working on making sure that he got rid of the poison coursing through Luke's system. Yoda sat quiet in meditation while the team got to work. Luke was very faint. His skin was very pale, and 83% of his blood was corrupt with the poison. Bail's team was the best on Alderaan, and they worked rigorously. As they put it, it was a miracle that he was still alive. Though it wasn't a miracle because Luke was possibly strong enough to stay alive. Though at the moment it seemed as if it was unlikely he would stay alive. It would take hours and several blood transplants to make sure that Luke would survive this endeavor. This would remove some of the essence of Force from within him. His power in the Force would diminish ever so slightly from this, and as Luke's natural body replenished itself, it would replace what was missing, though for now, Luke would be much weaker than his sister. When Bail finished up helping Luke, he gave Yoda crates worth of supplies full of new clothes, new cooking supplies, and everything else they might need along the way. Yoda was greatly pleased, and then he asked where Kenobi was. Bail didn't know. After a month of living on Alderaan, he said he was going to return one day, and then he vanished like a ghost. He hadn't had any contact with him since. Bail then informed Yoda that Ahsoka was still alive somewhere in the galaxy as well. He found her at Padme's funeral and spent some time talking to her before the clones arrived. Yoda was extremely relieved to hear that Ahsoka survived Order 66, and yet he was worried about the other Jedi out in the galaxy, especially Obi-Wan, though he believed Obi-Wan and Ahsoka were skilled enough to take care of themselves. Though before Bail left, he gave Yoda a small vessel that he could use whenever he needed if he wanted to get off-world and go somewhere else. When Bail eventually left, Yoda returned to his solitude before preparing to train the children. It would take nearly 2 more years until the children were of age to really start understanding anything. By this point, Luke had all of his essence in the Force back, and he was on par with where his sister was. Yoda still had a lot of waiting to do though. The best part for him was he was able to use his patience and work on himself so that he'd be a better teacher for when they were ready. Across the galaxy, Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi was working rigorously to help other Jedi stranded by Order 66. During this time, he learned that Vader didn't die on Mustafar, but during all of his attempts to find and kill Vader, he couldn't find him. Of course, Vader was looking for him, but it was a mere coincidence that the two of them didn't meet. In all actuality, it was the Emperor preventing the two of them from meeting. While he believed Vader to be a threat, he knew that with 2 years in the suit, he wouldn't be able to be a remote threat to Obi-Wan Kenobi. Sidious knew that Kenobi was a great duelist. After years of disrespecting the Jedi General, he now feared what he could do again to Vader. Though Obi-Wan was able to do something that he wouldn't have been able to do if he went into hiding. He was inspiring Jedi all across the galaxy. Because his name was so well known, and he was reported being seen, Jedi had hope. But they also knew that they should avoid any contact with the Sith. Why? Because they were under orders not to. Any chance Obi-Wan had, he informed them to avoid all confrontations with the Empire, especially with the Sith, because he knew that Vader would gain confidence if he was able to best the Knights and Padawans still alive. The Jedi to be spared instead of them going up and grouping up to fight Vader. They grouped up to help people instead. There were so many planets suffering because of the Empire. Serenna's capital was glassed and Count Dooku's palace was raided. On top of that, the Empire marched onto Mandalore and destroyed everything. That one hurt Kenobi's heart the most, knowing that Satine would have saved her people from what happened to them. On the other hand, Obi-Wan was elusive like a ghost, spotted when he wanted to be seen, but living the life of a hero. He inspired people like Saw Gerrera to focus on the most important pieces to leading a rebellion. With Kenobi's guidance, he was able to help Saw see that there were much more important matters than trying to beat down the Empire every chance they got. It was a psychological war, and he couldn't be waging said war on the population of the Empire. Because of Kenobi's wisdom, Saw wasn't seen as an insurgent, but more so a liberator. Especially since the clones were being phased out by the stormtroopers. Kenobi had heard rumors that many clones were dishonorably discharged for not obeying orders that Imperial officers gave them. This could simply mean an execution, which it normally was, or simply being kicked out of the military, which it rarely was. The clones struggled the most with the change into the Empire. While yes, many good soldiers did follow orders, they were people that had to live with those orders. People who served with Jedi and then killed those Jedi, only to undo everything they fought for in 3 years with the Empire. It didn't sit right with a lot of the clones, and rumor had it that a dispatchman's fist turned on him, though they were all subsequently killed and replaced by stormtroopers. Part of Obi-Wan's goal was that after he was able to save the Jedi, still lost in the galaxy, he would go and search for the clones that betrayed the Empire, and enlist them in his cause. Obi-Wan became a voice for the Jedi in the Outer Rim, and a little movement of both Jedi and civilians started called the Path. As it seemed, the Empire wasn't just interested in Jedi, but they were also interested in anyone with the ability to use the Force. While Obi-Wan was crusading across the galaxy in the name of justice and peace, Yoda began simple instruction with the twins. It was a little rough to begin with, but Yoda was able to use his intellect and skill as a teacher to work his way through to them. The children were, well, children, and they needed to be taken care of with great patience. Yoda used said patience while taking care of them, and it worked out in their favor. As the first couple years adding up, the two of them were able to start understanding more and more, and then Yoda took them off-world for the very first time. It was at this point of which he believed they were ready to start learning about the Force. So, they went to the planet of Ilum across the galaxy, so that Yoda could get them to retrieve their Kyber crystals. Both Luke and Leia were the most advanced students Yoda had ever had the honor of personally training. While yes, he had Plo Koon, Mace Windu, and Anakin Skywalker in multiple classes, he didn't train any of those students on a one-on-one circumstance. It was all classes of which he taught those students. Once the trio got to Ilum, Yoda led them to the temple and told them that they must complete this leg of the journey by themselves. He would be here waiting for them when they were done. Luke and Leia walked with each other into the cave. As 6-year-olds, this was a daunting task. Though having been raised on Dagobah, the biggest challenge to the two of them was facing the extreme colds of the planet. Unlike the typical students of the Jedi who traveled here, Luke and Leia didn't have order-issued jackets that were warm enough to melt the ice of Hoth. Luke and Leia simply had Alderaanian winter jackets, which winter on Alderaan never got nearly as cold as summer on Ilum. Regardless, the twins went in and started searching the cave. Yoda, on the other hand, left the temple. When they landed, he noticed a crashed ship in the ice of the planet. It looked to have been shot down, and so he walked across the snow and got into the ship that once belonged to Professor Huyang, the robotic droid that used to help thousands of Jedi build their lightsabers for the greater part of a millennia. When Yoda walked inside of the ship, everything was offline. Yoda sadly found Professor Huyang destroyed, his parts ripped apart by what looked to be a lightsaber. Yoda frowned and continued walking in as he got all the necessary parts. Yoda made sure he got enough parts so that they could change them around and make them larger when they got older. The particular hilts that Yoda got for them, though, were outfitted with the ability to change the length of the actual blade itself. This would come in handy when Yoda placed the materials into the vessel they arrived in, and then he returned to the temple and waited. Both Luke and Leia walked together. They trusted the Force, but the two of them didn't want to separate, and the pressure started to amount, being that the ice wall would soon freeze up, trapping them inside the caves for 19 days. Suggested that they try and split up to find their own crystals. Truthfully, Luke didn't want to do this. He preferred to be by his side through this entire process, but he agreed to do so because she suggested it. Yoda sat quietly, feeling every single choice the two children made on the inside, and yet they had made the correct decision. The Force was leading them in a way that they needed to learn. They needed to understand that while yes, they were powerful as a dyad in the Force, they needed to accept their roles as individuals within the Force. If they couldn't exist without the other, then they would truly be lost if they had to be separated. It was a great lesson that the Force gave openly to them. Not long before the ice wall fell, the two children came running out of the cave with smiles on their faces. They looked at Master Yoda with glee. They told him that they did it. Yoda smiled and asked what lesson they learned. They were strong as individuals, as strong as they were as a duo. The children smiled and walked with Yoda back to the vessel. They were both eager because they had both achieved their lightsaber crystals, and now they were taller than Master Yoda, which for children is a massive accomplishment. On the other side of the galaxy, the Jedi were faced with outrage. Jedi Master Kenobi had gone missing, and they knew where he had gone, and yet they didn't know what to do. The Jedi were being hunted down by the Empire. There were hundreds of Jedi Masters, Knights, and Padawans gathered up together. Kenobi saved hundreds of Jedi. One of the more notable Jedi was Master Terra Sanube, who was on the planet of Raxus with all these Jedi in the path when the Empire arrived. The truth is, Obi bought everyone enough time to escape. The Empire had enlisted its Inquisitors, except they came down to Raxus with also Lord Vader. Obi-Wan knew what to do. He knew Vader would be blinded by vengeance and only focus on fighting him. If he would buy everyone enough time to escape, then Vader wouldn't notice. Obi-Wan gave Master Sanube the communication device to contact Master Yoda with if they needed him, but Yoda was on an important mission and made sure that Obi-Wan told that to Sanube. The truth is, the fight was going really well. 6 years into using his suit, Vader had only fought 3 or 4 Jedi. Each of those times he was able to easily defeat the Jedi because they were just lost Padawans. But when he faced Obi-Wan, it was a different story. Vader informed everyone that he would fight Obi-Wan alone, and then Kenobi began beating Vader. The Inquisitors tried to help. Obi-Wan was good enough to defend himself from some of the Inquisitors, but a trigger-happy stormtrooper set his weapon for stun and shot Kenobi. There was now a defining issue in the Imperial ranks. The Inquisitors saw that Vader wasn't as strong as he was made up to be, and the stormtroopers saw it too, especially since Vader's suit was ripped apart, not revealing his face that laid under it, but the breathing apparatus was heavy enough to be heard, and it was very broken. Vader's voice was instead. Overall, this was a very bad look for him. He couldn't simply just turn around and kill everyone here either. He was too wounded and too surrounded. He was defeated and embarrassed by Obi-Wan once again, but this time everyone saw it. Vader demanded that Kenobi be taken to Fortress Inquisitorius for questioning and torture. The Inquisitors did so as their master requested. By the time Vader got around to where the path was located, they were all gone. Obi-Wan made the ultimate sacrifice and every Jedi knew it. Not only did they know it, but the people knew it. It was an ignition of a passion, a flame if you will, for the people of a small rebellion. More people would come to learn about this and join their ranks. Yoda would be informed about it by Master Terra Sanube, to which he would inform the Jedi Master that it would be by the will of the Force that Kenobi's fate would be sealed. Sanube was disappointed that Yoda didn't want to become seen, but Yoda knew the importance of Kenobi's decision. Not everyone knew that Yoda was still alive, only a few of the Masters, and of course Bail Organa. Obi-Wan's sacrifice to the larger group of Jedi had an immortal effect. It made them realize that
even more than previously how high the stakes were for them to succeed. Kenobi's sacrifice wouldn't be in vain, and they all believed that to be the case. Because if Yoda just returned, it would ruin the immortal status of his sacrifice, so he didn't return. Instead of Fortress Inquisitorius, the Grand Inquisitor, along with Darth Vader, began their interrogation of Kenobi. Vader wasn't holding back. He made Obi-Wan's life a living hell, whether it be lighting his outfit on fire so that his body would burn up, or using drastically hot knives to scar his skin that had been previously burnt. Vader would use a constant technique of throwing Obi-Wan's biology off kilter. He would light his body on fire and then freeze a limb that was on fire. It sent Obi-Wan's physicality into drastically different directions, confusing all the makeup of his body into a painful array of suffering. Once Vader took a break, the Grand Inquisitor took over the torture, but he wasn't as vile as Vader was. Simple torture techniques that the Empire had created over the past 6 years. When Vader eventually returned, he used the Force to throw the Grand Inquisitor from his feet. Truthfully, Vader was pissed that the Grand Inquisitor wasn't torturing Obi-Wan as drastically as he had. The Grand Inquisitor looked over at Vader, who ignited his lightsaber and started walking up to Obi-Wan. Kenobi had been through it all, and he was barely staying alive. He was barely able to even function, and he looked ready to die. As Vader prepared to cut off Obi-Wan's dominant hand, he was thrusted into a great pain. The Grand Inquisitor was behind him, his lightsaber fixated on Kenobi. Vader cried out in pain as he ripped himself around, and the Grand Inquisitor ducked out of the way, before using the Force to unlock Kenobi's restraints, dropping him from the prison structure. Did he care for the Jedi? Not at all. But did he care for Vader? Definitely not. Vader was a fool, and the Grand Inquisitor believed he was detrimental to the Empire, sacrificing resources to focus on Kenobi when they could have stopped the entire path on Raxus. Vader began slugging around, unable to keep his balance. The lightsaber wound not just hurt his suit, but his physical body as well. Kenobi fell and his garments were shredded, and his skin nearly melted. He looked up and everything was foggy. He saw the blurs of 2 crimson blades moving around, but he couldn't make out what it was. The Grand Inquisitor then called over the loudspeakers, demanding that Imperial troops arrive at this particular location. Lord Vader had betrayed the Empire. Vader swung violently at the Grand Inquisitor, but he was all too weak. All the anger in the galaxy couldn't help him. The entire panel that helped his suit operate was dysfunctioning, and he himself was essentially mortally wounded. Obi-Wan heard the announcement and crawled out of the way, trying to find somewhere to get away to. Kenobi found a vent and cracked it open to sneak in on the dark side of the room. When he closed the vent, he covered his mouth. The vent was freezing. Truthfully, it was just room temperature, but to freshly burnt skin, it felt like the tundras of Hoth. Kenobi had tears come out of his eyes from the pain as he heard more lightsabers ignite behind him and the sound of blaster fire ring out. The cries of men as they fought off the hulking Darth Vader. Obi-Wan could feel it in the Force. A lot of people were dying. Stormtroopers ripped a limb from limb as the Grand Inquisitor threw all the Inquisitors present at Fortress Inquisitorius at the Sith Lord. The second sister died, the 8th brother was cut down, the 5th brother holding his own as the 3rd sister was dropped to her death. The 9th sister ran up and threw Vader from his feet with all of her sheer physical strength. Stormtroopers started landing shots on the back of Vader's suit as he cried out in anger. The agony was too much and all the pain went through his body as he killed some worthless life forms in his eyes. Vader turned around and used the Force to crush the bodies of the 24 stormtroopers gathered in the room, throwing them through glass walls and out of the torture chamber. Vader and started cutting away at him. Vader blocked the strikes as best as he could before another squad of stormtroopers started blasting away, clipping the back of Vader, to which he slammed his blade through the 9th sister before he could return to try and kill the stormtroopers, the Grand Inquisitor, and the 8th brother. The Grand Inquisitor landed a final blow, cutting across Vader's neck and watching him suffocate on the ground. He was a former Jedi Temple guard at the Jedi Temple, but he wouldn't have come out victorious if he hadn't been in for the initial surprise. The Grand Inquisitor told the stormtroopers that Kenobi was free in the complex, demanding that they go out and find him and then bring him to him. While the Grand Inquisitor gave Kenobi the chance to escape, it was all a part of the plan. See, the Grand Inquisitor saw Vader at his weakest. He almost lost to Obi-Wan on Raxus, and he needed to help beat. Now, Obi-Wan was weak to where the Grand Inquisitor could be seen as a powerful asset to the Emperor if he captured Kenobi by himself. It was all a part of a plan to gain more favorability with the Emperor, though Kenobi made his way down to the bottom of the complex and tried to keep himself steady. Obi-Wan knew that if he didn't fix this now, he could get a severe infection or just as easily fall into hypothermia and die. Yoda could feel Kenobi's agony from a galaxy away, and he thought about contacting Terrace Nube, but before he could, the children of Skywalker came up to him and asked him who died. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is part 1 of our story. Again, special thanks to Benjamin Wells, Jonathan, Pimp Daddy Bane, Darth, Cheesy Apollo, Madman Studios, Anakin 003, and Flan Francis for supporting the channel. Hit tails and likes on this video. I don't know what's coming next, but it is. If you want to see what if, let me know down below. Check out the Twitch, community Discord, and Patreon if you want to support me in other ways. Go check out these awesome channels, and go check out the merch down below. I got a whole bunch of new merch, all custom made for you guys. And let's talk about the story. Also, a new giveaway will be announced in the coming days. Talk about the story. So, yeah, a two-parter. I was originally going to do this in one part, but more than I can really get away with writing in a single video. So I decided that I was going to do a part 1 to this, and I'll do a part 2 to this, and I don't think there'll be a part 3, but I'm definitely going to do a part 2 to this. But I'm going to talk about the A plot and the B plot real quick, and their significance to this story, because this, again, originally wasn't supposed to be 2 parts, but I thought there'd be a significance having an A plot and a B plot, making the story feel more vast. You're going to be concerned about Obi-Wan first of all, and the truth is you can't really do much with Yoda training the children for the first couple years, and we kind of have that issue with Anakin. And because you can have an A plot and a B plot with Anakin's stories, it allows me to, like, for example, Anakin being trained from birth. You can't really have an A plot and a B plot. You have to focus on him. He's the main story and the main protagonist of the story. But with Obi-Wan out in the galaxy, that gives the ability to continue the story in a vast scope, is how the Earth series works and how it kind of expands upon the Star Wars universe. And that's what it's supposed to do here. It's supposed to be A plot, B plot, where I can kind of jump back and forth. And now you've got some interest going on for Kenobi's life, but also interest going on in how Yoda's going to train Luke and Leia. So I'm really excited for part 2. I'm going to start writing that. Part 4 of the Earth series is going to be coming out. I do have an announcement before I go anywhere and end this video. The Earth series videos, or the Earth shirt, the Pride of the Empire shirt, that is a limited time shirt that'll be out for the entire duration of Season 1 of the Earth series. I mentioned that earlier. What does that mean? I don't know. You have to find out. Anyways, thank you all for 50,000 subscribers. Let's go for the next milestone. SWT, I'm coming for you. All respect, though. Anyways, I love you all. Spread the love. And always remember, may the Force be with you.